Pneumatic system. The air supply inlet is located at the bottom of the APU. The air supply inlet is protected by a wire screen. The air flows directly to the power section compressor where it is compressed and used for combustion, oil system pressurization, and for the operation of the surge control valve and the bleed load valve. The airflow through the load compressor is controlled by the internal inlet guide vanes, which are positioned by the inlet guide vane actuator. The inlet guide vane actuator is installed at the 4 o'clock position on the load compressor housing. It is operated by a torque motor using high-pressure servo fuel from the fuel control unit. The air is discharged through the load compressor outlet to the bleed air manifold, which is installed at the 3 o'clock position. The bleed air manifold supplies the aircraft pneumatic system with compressed air, which can be used for engine starting and air conditioning. The electronic control box uses air pressure, air temperature, and airflow data for control and monitoring operations. The P2 sensor is mounted on the right side of the air inlet plenum at the 3 o'clock position. The load compressor inlet temperature sensor is installed at the 5 o'clock position on the load compressor housing. The load compressor discharge temperature sensor is installed at the 3 o'clock position on the bleed air manifold. The data is used for condition monitoring. The load compressor discharge airflow is measured by the bleed flow sensor assembly, which is installed on the bleed air manifold. The load compressor outlet pressure sensor measures the load compressor discharge air pressure and transmits an electrical signal to the electronic control box. The differential pressure sensor measures the load compressor discharge air pressure and the load compressor outlet static air pressure. The variable volume chamber protects the sensors by dampening the pressure surges in the load compressor air supply. The load compressor discharge airflow is controlled by the surge control valve and the bleed load valve. The surge control valve is installed on the rear of the bleed air manifold. The surge control valve is operated by an actuator which uses high-pressure air from the power section compressor. The actuator is controlled by a torque motor, which is controlled by the electronic control box. The surge control valve opens during the APU shutdown cycle and vents the unused air to the APU exhaust. The bleed load valve is installed on the front of the bleed air manifold. It is operated by an actuator that uses high-pressure air from the power section compressor, which is routed through the surge control valve high-pressure air manifold. The high-pressure air is controlled by a solenoid valve. The bleed valve position is indicated by a position switch and a visual position indicator. The air from the inlet plenum is ducted to the gearbox-driven fan. The fan supplies air to the APU compartment cooling air manifold and to the air-cooled oil cooler.